In India, we have this huge fascination for public sector job, which is government job. And youths are mad about to take government job. But before that, we need to know the basic differences between public sector jobs and private sector jobs. And there are certain benefits of public sector and private sector, which youths must know about this. Hello friends, welcome to the Economy Primer series of Drishti IAS. I am Ritu and today's session is about private sector and public sector. So moving towards the points of discussion part. First of all, we are going to discuss that why this particular topic is into the discussion. Then we'll have an intro of public sector and private sector. Then we are going to describe the differences between the two, and we are also going to highlight that what is the contribution by these two sectors in the Indian economy, and then practice question for prelims. Before that, you have to like, share and subscribe to the Drishti IAS channel. Moving towards the discussion part. So, before moving to the discussion, this is the holy discount, and 40% discount is given to the GS Foundation course on online GS Foundation course, and EMI facility is also available. If you have any queries, kindly dial on to this number. So, moving to the discussion part. So these cutouts we have taken from the newspaper. Private investments rise in India, very visible, says ADB. Startup Mahakumbh, leaders from private public sector gathered to promote startups. Private sector in India must invest in clean energy, IFC regional vice president. Public sector banks told to spell out 3-year business plans by March end. Revenue boom for Modi government as PSU dividend recipient said to the touch 62,000 crore. So what all these cutouts says that? So all these cutouts says that we are actively involved in both sector, and especially the government is taking care of the both sectors, and we have few initiatives to promote the public sector as well as the private sector because it is regulated by the government. So moving to the introduction part. So what is the basic difference between the public sector and the private sector? So whenever you talk about the public sector, public means it is the government sector. And when we talk about the private sector, it means that entities or anything is owned by a private individual or group of people or any private entities. So this is the basic difference between the public sector and the private sector. And here when we come to that, who is the responsible authority? So here the government is the responsible authority, and in a public sector it is not always mandatory that you do any services or you provide any services, so it is mandatory for to earn the profit. But in comparison to the private sector, when we talk about the private sector, so the motive is to earn the profit here. So this is the basic differences we have among public sector and the private sector. So moving towards the differences, that what is the difference we have, and this is the classification. So first we need to know that what are the classification of center public enterprises. So we have 3 kind of center public sector enterprises. First is Maharatna, then second is Navratna, and third is Mini Ratna. We'll have a separate session on this central public private enterprises, and then we'll know about what are the numbers we have. So presently we are 13 Maharatnas, 16 Navratnas, and 47 Mini Ratna 1 and 11 Mini Ratna 2. So there are 2 categories among Mini Ratnas. So 47 Mini Ratna phase 1 and then category 2 just 11. So here there is a new term which is very in vogue, and so many developing economies are also adopting this method, which is public-private partnership. So what is public-private partnership? So it is arrangement between government and private sector enterprises. And what we have seen that for a period of time, the government takes services and other things and maybe the earnings from the private sector, but it is not definitely a private owned authority. So here you must not confuse that, okay, this is a public-private sector enterprise, that it is owned by both. Most of the time what we have seen that it is owned by the government, but it takes services and help from the private sector, and it gives the authority for a certain period of time for the investment and for everything. So this is the thing. And it has the responsibility by the government for the providing the services, it does not amount to privatization. So this thing is very much clear here. And on the basis of open competitiveness bidding receives the performance linked payment. So how does any private entity gets this public private partnership? So on the basis of open bidding and also for the performance based, the government choose any entity ki, okay, will work with you, and then PPP route can be alternative for the developing countries, because most of the developing countries are adopting this route in order to develop their economies. Because what we have seen, in fact in India also, most of the wealth has been accumulated by the 10 or just 5% of the individual of this country. So in that scenario, 95% of the population is dependent on the government services and they don't have much wealth. So in that scenario, the government has to take help from the private sector in order to develop infrastructure and other projects. So because of this, developing countries are adopting this route. So moving to the next slide is about what are the differences we have. So when it comes to the ownership or control or manage, so public sector is managed by the government or state run bodies. And when it comes to the ownership and control, so it is owned and governed by the individuals or group of business entities. And here what we have seen that it is in public sector, it is owned and regulated by the government. But here it is not owned by the government, but it is regulated by the government, because there are so many company acts and so many things we have acts and rules and regulation which private sector has to also follow when they are working in a particular country, when they are working in a particular area. So this is the thing. And what's the main motive of the public sector? So along with the profit, their main motive also is to provide and serve the general public. But here main motive is to earn the profit. And what is the source of capital for the public sector? So we have tax collections, excise and other duties, bonds, treasury bills. Coming to the private sector, so here maybe an individual fund for a particular project, and also owners through the loans, issuing shares and debentures. And what are the benefits we have for this public sector? So here there is a job security, different kind of employment, and also housing facilities. In comparison to private sector also, we have definitely few facilities, that's like bonuses, high salary packages. But when it comes to the stability, in India, the public sector is more stable than the private sector. So these are the basic differences we have, public sector and the private sector. Moving to the next slide is about what are the contributions we have when we talk about the GDP, when we talk about the national income. So according to a recent report, 14% of the country's GDP can be attributed to the public sector in India. So the government just attribute 14% of the country's GDP, and it also helps to generate the creation and expansion of infrastructure and creating other opportunity. And according to a report released by India Ratings and Research, so what that report says that public sector makes up 20% of the national income but pays around 40% of all the wages. And in an analysis based on the gross value added. And what is this gross value added? So it is a income or economic activity generated for a particular industry or for a particular sector. So this is called as gross value added. Shows that around 19% we get the contribution from this public sector, but the government paid wages around 39.2%. And when it comes to the private sector, so it is more balanced in nature. So the GVA of the private sector is 35.2% and it paid wages around 36.3%. So here it is more balanced in comparison to the public sector. So the government had to work onto this area that there should be no huge differences between the contribution and the wages. So moving to the question part. So the question is, consider the following statement regarding Mini Ratna, and the first statement is Mini Ratna 1. So there are two categories in Mini Ratnas. Enterprises might invest up to rupees 100 crore in a project without obtaining government approval. And the second one is the maximum limit for Mini Ratna 2 enterprises was rupees 50 crore. So here you have to find the correct statement. So kindly answer in the comment section. I hope you like this session. If you have any queries related to this session, Kindly ask in the comment section. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.